Broadcasting live from the vulva, this is the Monstrous Feminine, the podcast where horrible women talk about horror. My name's Louisa, and I'm joined by my sexy snacks.
Mila,
Tyia,
and Zeba.
And this episode is all about virginity and the body as horror tropes. But before we get into that, go ahead and follow us on Spotify and or subscribe to us on YouTube and the Apple Podcast app. You can find all of our links on our Instagram at the Monstrous Feminine Podcast.
We'll be starting with the 2007 horror classic film Teeth, directed by Mitchell Lichtenstein. Then we'll be discussing the 2014 film It Follows, directed by David Robert Mitchell. Lastly, we will break down the 2016 film Raw, directed by Julia Ducournau. We will talk about how virginity, the body, and sex are all used as tropes in this film. We will also be diving into the connection between sex and death in horror that we mentioned previously in episode 1, and the castrating effects of women in horror that we explained in episode 2. Get ready for a bite because this episode has teeth in unexpected places. Enjoy.
Anybody have any weird body stories? My belly button used to be an outie and now it's an innie. That's my update of my life. But this happened very recently. I've been an outie my whole life and I became an innie like 6 months ago. Like deadass, I looked down one day and my belly button was different.
If you could have any like weird body superpower, what would you want?
Ooh, Elastigirl. Obviously Elastigirl.
Speaking of Elastigirl, I saw a TikTok recently where someone was like, can she choose when she had her children from Mr. Incredible, like was she able to just like elastic the vagina and like push, they just fly out like instantly so she doesn't have labor pains?
That's so useful.
Or is it like she can only do like her arms and stuff? I feel like she probably did. The most painless labor on earth.
I know somebody who has a sexual toe. Like if someone like sucks on their toe, it wait, you're all frozen, which means I'm frozen for you. Can you hear me?
you're not. I'm
You're not frozen.
Unfortunately,
We are
in
in shock.
all hearing what you're saying.
So they have a sexual toe where if someone sucks it, they can orgasm through that toe specifically. Not just a foot fetish.
The part of your brain that registers feet and the part of your brain that registers arousal are really close together. And some people are just born with that part of their brain, like the distance being closer. It's actually the most common fetish, foot fetishes. It's just people don't talk about it. I just can't relate, but I feel like if your brain is built that way, it's not hurting anyone to like do a little foot rub.
You could be a cannibal, so on the scale of feet to cannibal,
I think, yeah.
Some kinks need to be shamed, quite frankly. The Monstrous Feminine is on Apple Podcasts, so please go give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review and tell us that you love us or tell us whatever you want. And if you do, you might get a shout out in a future episode and you can be our Witch of the Week. Our Witch of the Week this week is someone named Midnight Snack. That is so fitting for this episode. And they gave us 5 stars and they said, recent favorite podcast. Love how this podcast knits horror movies and feminism together. Insightful, playful, and definitely powerful. And then they put a bunch of spooky emojis. So thank you so much, Midnight Snack.
Thank you.
I really like that username.
The 2007 film Teeth tells the story of Dawn, an ultra-Christian teenager who is determined to save herself from marriage. Dawn has a reciprocated crush on her fellow Chastity Club member Toby. The teen's attraction begins to take a more physical turn. When Dawn decides she's not ready for that and Toby continues anyway, she receives some help from a pair of teeth down below, ready to bite back.
You made a bet about me when I had taken a sacred vow of abstinence?
I had a hunch that it wasn't all that sacred.
It was, though.
Your mouth is saying one thing, babe. But your sweet pussy is saying something very different.
Shit.
Would you want teeth?
I definitely want them in my mouth.
when we see in the movie when she does have consensual sex, like the teeth don't bite, they only defend her from rapists, which I think it says like in some of the research that I did, it's actually usually used as a cautionary tale to warn of the dangers of unknown women and to discourage rape, which is interesting. Although every single man in this movie was trash.
My roommate and I, since we saw this movie, anytime we're watching anything now that has a horrible man in it, we just say teeth. Like, just the situation will be made better by teeth. We say nothing else.
And, like, it's not that negative, because it's not like she was going around just, like, biting off anyone's dick. It was just only rapists' dick. So, like, honestly, it would not be the worst thing in the world.
But does she have to, like, ever deal with the consequences of, like, murder? Like, no one ever investigated any
To
of
be
that.
honest, would you actually die if someone cut off your dick?
Yeah, you'd lose a
Yeah,
lot of
from blood loss you would. It's like losing a limb. You would die from blood loss really
People
quick.
lived from castration, though.
That's generous. A limb.
But they, like, cauterize it and, like, stop the blood flow. There's a process to it.
But I mean, if they, like, burned it, then wouldn't it stop the bleeding? They'd literally be fine. So she can't go to jail for their stupidity.
No, she can go to jail. It was still...
No, you cannot go around cutting people's penises.
She didn't
off
cut
and
it
have that be
off. It
illegal
got bit
activity.
off. What are they gonna do? Be like,
By her.
open your legs so we can see if you'll match the bite marks. Who's gonna
Yeah,
ask
they did.
that?
They had a tooth. They could cross-reference that lone tooth.
Isn't there DNA in teeth? There has to be.
They can match your dental records, but no one would have her dental records. Yeah. One thing that I am curious about in this scenario is, because it's like, if it's unwanted, the teeth strike, could she figuratively, I don't know, cut off her own hands if she starts to feel repressed while masturbating?
No, I feel like it's just like, I don't think she has like that little control over it.
We never got to see it. I was expecting that we would get a hand mirror shot. I kind of wanted to see the anatomy of the situation.
What I'm curious about is, how did it take her so long? Because she does, like, go to the bathroom and was like, oh no, wait, I have teeth. And I was like, so she's never, I don't know, seen her vagina in the past how many years?
That's
A
normal.
lot of people have and never will
Yeah.
see their vagina.
But what about when she's wiping? Like, after she pees and she wipes, presumably, I don't know, wouldn't it get caught on it or something?
They're inside. They're in the vagina. They're not anywhere near the vulva, I think. They're, like, up there.
So she doesn't use tampons, I'm guessing.
I don't think she would have used tampons because she was like in the chastity club, and I don't know. I mean, obviously you could be chaste and use tampons.
If the men didn't feel it while when they were having consensual sex, I think even if she, like, you know, used a tampon or investigated herself with her fingers, I don't think she'd feel the teeth either.
I'm gonna say it's a plot hole, because she does like look down in a scene and she's like, oh my gosh.
That's because of the diagram.
Yeah, she looks at the diagram. She goes to that length to look at the textbook. But then I thought the teeth, later on, they present it like the teeth are just inside. Because if they were visible, then no one would have stuck their hand in there.
We needed the mirror shot to clarify.
Also, I don't know why she, like, had to, like, hack or, like, get the mirror, rub the mirror thing off of her textbook when she could have just Googled it because she had the internet.
Yeah, that was a weird. Maybe she felt, like, guilty about doing that.
I just thought it was for the imagery of ripping the sticker off and that being, like, a yeah. I don't think there was anything more to it.
Okay. I mean, the film in general I thought was, like, not great. Not good. But it's like an excellent topic, but a kind of a bad film. Like, her Christianity dissolves halfway through.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, as a plot, it just goes. Like, after she puts the purity ring in the waterfall, she's just like, okay. And then it's just never mentioned again. And I was just like, I'm gonna need more.
I thought it was because she assumed she was, like, ruined. Like, after...
Yeah,
Yeah,
but,
I think
like,
she just, like, gave the fuck up.
it just seemed like a very lazy, like, okay, done with that plot. And then it's just not brought up again. I was like, okay, sure.
This movie also was done by Kenny JD for her Bad Movies and a Beat. So yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people like the movie because I feel like it's one of the few movies that have did vagina dentata. However, all in all, it's just kind of messed up. For one, they use sexual assault way too many times. Like, at this point, I was like, I don't really understand what you're getting at. Like, why?
I feel like all of the times that she was like assaulted were referencing how she was like so not about to give it up. Like, she had no intention of having sex. She had a really intent, that was her identity, was waiting till marriage. And I think that, like, all besides the gynecologist, that was like its own thing. For all the other sexual assaulters in the story, I feel like they took it as a challenge. Like, it was all about her virginity, and then after that it was all about, like, the conquest, her stepbrother, which I have
So weird. Weird.
The other thing about it, which was kind of bad, was, like, the part where it suddenly becomes consensual with the guy, or it's like marketed, I guess, is like, oh, this is the consensual sex. So when it's consensual, she doesn't like bite him. But I was like, but that wasn't consensual, and this is how I can tell it's like 2007, because she was still like sedated for that, and then also her mom was in the hospital.
Yeah.
It was just not a consensual situation. So I was like, even that was rape, but then that in the movie was meant to be like, oh, okay, so the teeth don't bite when she doesn't want it to. And I was like, yeah, but they should have bitten in that instance too. So I'm a bit like, a little bit of a, like, not great portrayal.
Not great portrayal, but I feel like the lore of it, I kept trying to figure out, is like, are they an entity separate from her, or do they react to her emotions? Because there were I have some questions about like where the teeth came from. They always show that their house is behind a nuclear power plant. They are constantly letting us know that. I'm like, is there something in the water? Did something happen to her as a kid in that like pool when the teeth first came out? Like, was it the hose water? I'm not sure, but I felt it was weird. They showed that nuclear power plant like 5 or 6 times, but then we learn about the vagina dentata like myth, and then I'm like, okay, is it an evolutionary defense mechanism that has happened all over cultures? So I was confused why they would show those like contradictory like origin stories. Like, why bother showing that there was a nuclear facility at all?
I also noticed that they kept showing that like long shot of the nuclear power plant in the background of the house, and I was just like, that probably means nothing. But now that you said that,
yeah, same. I'm so stupid.
but also I do think that their like whole shtick with the biology teacher, I think she was a biology teacher, talking about like adaptations and evolution, and how like sometimes you know, a species might have a sort of seemingly random mutation that ends up benefiting that species. So maybe actually they could still both be true. Like, a nuclear power plant causes a mutation. Like, that's still true.
It's interesting that they were talking about evolution at all. But no, she wasn't at like a religious school.
I don't understand why they made her religious in this movie, because I honestly don't think it would have made a difference if she was just someone who was like uncomfortable with her sexuality. It would have still worked. There was no real reason to make her religious, because it didn't play a part in anything, because she was assaulted every time. So it wasn't like she was grappling with her religion and her urge to have sex because she didn't really want to. I thought it was a very odd choice, and it was like a way to, I guess, try to link religion and sexuality, but it was just a really poor link between the two. Because it was like, well, there's nothing, I mean, I guess we're meant to think that the guy is not really very religious and he's just like in the group to find a girl. But I mean, of all places, why would you go to the chastity club to find someone to have sex with? That just doesn't make sense. Like,
because some people are into that. That's
Yeah.
some
I
people's,
guarantee
like,
you he
thing.
could find a virgin and band. I guarantee you.
Oh, leave band alone.
Wait, if he's like a serial rapist, because there was a line that said he was like confessing that he'd done it before, and maybe it was anal. I wasn't sure what he was getting at. But if he's a
I think he
serial
was saying
rape,
that he had anal.
okay. But still, if we can assume that he's done it before, then you probably would go to the chastity club, because what other group is going to be more ashamed about speaking out than that group, you know?
True.
Maybe they're less likely to report it.
He didn't say what kind of anal. For a second, I thought he got pegged.
When did
don't
he
think
talk
that's what
about
happened.
anal?
When they were on their first date and they were first
As you do.
like, she's like, are you a virgin? And he's like, yeah. Oh, I guess I am a virgin in his eyes.
Yeah.
That's when...
I didn't think of anal. I was thinking like, oh, he's probably gotten blowjobs or something.
Oh, I thought also he was masturbating.
I thought he'd done it and he just like repented.
No.
Oh. I missed that.
Her stepbrother, honestly, just is the last final stitch in the fabric that makes this movie so uncomfortable. I think there's a weird fetish kink for a lot of people to like be like step siblings and stuff, because they're like, it's not real incest.
Isn't it the most popular porn category? It's like teen and then step sis or stepmom.
And like, I think it's because they're like, it's not real incest, but it's like incest light. But because they grew up together as children, it feels even weirder. And then him trying to molest her as a child, and then being like, I will never sleep with a girl by vaginal intercourse, only anal. But for her, I'm saving the D to get bit off.
That was low-key giving Bridgerton to me. I know they weren't doing anal, but it was the fact that they would like pull out every time.
I mean,
really
indeed.
funny to me.
Can we talk about that opening scene though? Because I was rereading Ms. Creed, and I thought that was quite an interesting reworking of this. First of all, when Creed is talking about like women as castrators, there are apparently 3 forms: the deadly femme castratrice, the castrating mother, and the vagina dentata. And I think in this film we see a kind of, obviously the vagina dentata, but also like the deadly femme castratrice figure. I mean, when Creed talks about that, she's talking about like mostly like women in slasher films who like carry a knife, but also that they tend to be like motivated by this like rape revenge thing. So I think like here that kind of works as well, because she's very like, obviously in the end she's acting out of revenge. But anyway, focusing on the opening scene to begin with, Creed talks about when she's analyzing Freud, how Freud thinks that like when little boys first see their sister's vagina, no, I don't know, but this is Freud, right? I don't think these situations are real, but this is his analysis. They experience a kind of like castration anxiety. Well, that comes later, because at first they think, oh no, it just must be really small. She still has one, but it's really small. The woman is not really active in the castration anxiety. Like, the man realizes it later. It's actually the father who's like more the castrating one, because he becomes the rival, and then boys think, oh, I'm gonna have to find a woman of my own. But Creed is like, no, it's the mother who induces the castration anxiety fear, not just because she doesn't have a penis, but because there's this fear of like getting that they will take your penis away. So I think this scene is kind of interesting, because in this discovery, it basically like it depicts Freud's like sexual penis discovery story, origin story, but kind of rewrites it from Creed's perspective, in that like when he goes to molest his sister to try to like explore or whatever, he gets his finger cut off. So it's literally like, and then he has like that deep fear of castration anxiety. So it's kind of like an interesting rewriting of Freud's like sexual exploration in siblings, which, like we said, doesn't take place. But
do you guys think that because the brother, even though he did seemingly have some castration anxiety, is also maybe almost obsessed with the ideal of her because he did experience the bite from her? So in a way, like he's waiting to experience his bite all over again, as if he wants it to happen, because if he knows that her vagina has these teeth, why is he like waiting? And she's like the only one who he wants to put his penis inside of. Is it his own want to like punish himself for being literal garbage? Or
if you're like looking at it from like, again, more Freudian Creed perspective, I think it's like she almost becomes this like weird fetish object for him, because he's like she almost heightens the mystery because she bit back, so now he like needs to know like the mystery of it, like, and he needs to, like, be overcome confirmed. It. Yeah, like the conquer it or something.
I don't think he's in love with her. I think he has
he says it.
a fascination, or like a, not even more than obsession, like a fixation with her, because I think it's like, like Mila, like you were saying, until he conquers her, he cannot have sex without castration anxiety in the background.
But he's like, from the age of childhood, he's like, I saw you for the first time when we were children, and I was like in love with you from that moment. I was like, what in the Jacob and Renesmee? It seems like it seems like this is a personal obsession where like he will honestly does not want anyone else.
I really think it's like the sort of Freudian conquer thing. Freud said like the mother bleeds, and that this heightens castration anxiety. Like there's this fear that like it ate the penis. I'm mixing mother and sister. I was starting with the brother and sister, because that's like his first experience to be like, why don't you have a penis? But then when we go back to like conversations about like the castrating, like who does the castrating, is often the mother, not the sister, or like the woman in general.
When her stepbrother first like tries to molest her, well, he does molest her, do you think in that moment her teeth grew, or that she always had teeth? Because if she always had teeth, then it suggests like a society, like I know that's a societal issue, but it suggests that the film is about the like societal issue. But if it grew in that moment, then it's more like a manifestation of her trauma.
Okay, I I do think it's trying to be about we live in a society, TM, you know? In the same way that other films that we've watched have tried to like be about an issue, but I think this borders on comedy too much. Like the same way that like Black Christmas, the remake, bordered on comedy too much. Like, okay, I get it. I get what you're trying to say, if that rape is bad. And thank you for your astute analysis. But
I also wrote in the notes, actually, in my notes, that like, why is this a comedy? I was like, this topic shouldn't be a comedy, and I wanted it to be redone as a horror, but not a comedy horror, like a straight up horror. Like, you know what I mean?
I think this movie honestly doesn't work well as a body horror movie. I know it's like the one that people reference a lot just because of, I guess, it being basically the only movie about vagina dentata, but not in the sense of like it's not body horror, because it is. But I think the movie has so many different elements that don't quite come together to make it a cohesive horror story. So I feel like her teeth do come from her brother trying to, molesting her the first time. Them even making like the child molestation scene in the movie, I feel like they should have centered the movie around her having trauma about having sex because of that experience, rather than them never really mentioning it or her having any trauma about it at all. They never allude to her even thinking about that. All of it is just based around like, I am Christian and God doesn't want me to do this, rather than like, I had a very traumatic experience with someone touching me inappropriately as a child and inserting a finger inside of me. That never comes up. And I also feel like they kind of make her stepbrother feel like, oh, he's so gaga in love with her, and you don't necessarily see them try to point out that he's the villain in the story, with the exception of what he does to her mom.
I feel like he is the villain, but I am totally with you on why wasn't that the main plot, and why wasn't that the cause for her like reluctance to have sex? Like, that's what I mean. Like, why was she a Christian, and why was that dropped halfway through? Like, it could have been much more cohesive as a plot point if they used that. But I think he's the villain. Like, he has that dog, he has like loads of tattoos and super angsty. Like, in terms of like 2000s movie tropes, I think he's definitely like the villain. They're weird for making him in love. I think it should have been more like, they should have explored the angle of like, I want to see what's down there, like what was that bit, like I'm curious, like, or I'm afraid for my own self. So in this weird like death desire kind of paradox, I'm gonna go in.
He did need to honestly go, because he was a loose cannon. I'm worried about what direction her stepbrother was going to go in with his actions in this movie. So honestly, she did us a favor.
Back to your question, Mila, about like if she was born with if she was born with this vagina dentata, or like grew it. I honestly hadn't really thought about that, but then I guess with the nuclear plant, like it could have been like the vagina dentata myth was like came from men thinking that there was a snake up there, that there was like maybe a little fish up there that would like bite, so maybe like some mutant thing like slid on in. Some cultures thought it was like a biting fish up in your vag.
Is no one afraid of putting dicks in mouths? Is there are teeth in mouths, and dicks go in mouths all the time. Like, why do, you know what I mean? Like, if it's such an anxiety of getting bit, of getting castrated.
But there is, like, Creed argues, like, anytime you see a gaping mouth or toothy mouth in horror, it's low-key the castration anxiety of the vagina as well. And she, like, analyzes Freud's transposition hypothesis with dreams, saying that like whenever you dream about like teeth, you're just transposing like your fear of down below and that castration anxiety to the mouth.
I have never dreamed about teeth in my life.
Oh, I dream about my teeth coming loose.
Oh,
I dream about my teeth all the time. Yeah, it's like a really common anxiety dream.
Pack it up, Chip Skylark.
Oh my god, yeah. I think it like also tried to be quite like poignant about it. Like, we had those clips to Medusa, and I feel like it could have been just like, not to sound like pretentious, but I just feel like it could have been like more style with it or something, or like slower, like ironically, like I don't know, this would like be a great like art house horror topic or for film or something like artsy. They could have like done a lot of like with the artwork and the iconography, but it was just like a cut clip in a really like otherwise cheap movie. And I wish that there could have been more, like, finesse.
I feel like this movie had the same, like, mood board as But I'm a Cheerleader and Edward Scissorhands, and I don't really know how to explain that. like the very, I don't know, suburbia feel of like extremely bright colors. I don't know. And I feel like that just doesn't scream horror in my mind. Like I know when we did Midsommar, all of us were saying like horror films that do daytime instead of nighttime are scary. But in this instance, it was just like, I feel nothing. What am I meant to feel by this movie? I genuinely do not feel terrified, but also maybe it's because, I mean, why would I be afraid of vagina dentata?
I think what you said about, like, why is this a body horror is actually interesting, because it's like, maybe it would only be for, like, rapey men, because, like, for women who watch it, it's like, this isn't scary. It's scary what happens to her, but the actual horror doesn't come from her body for us. The horror comes from all the other men, so it's not really a true body horror if we're not scared of the thing her body is making her do. We're scared of the men who are doing it to her, what her body is reacting to.
If I had a dick, seeing all those castrated dicks, I'd be like, yep, 100% a horror movie.
Only if you're gonna put it in somewhere where you shouldn't be.
No, but even still, the thing about body horror, it doesn't have to be like, I can see myself in this situation. It's, I have that body part, and that part is not on a person anymore. I think it's just about, like, the feeling of it. When somebody stuck a finger up there, and then the finger got severed, I still felt that in the way that I feel body horror, because I have a finger.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
like,
did think
it's about the embodiment of like the visual and like feeling it on your own self and like imagining what that would feel like.
You know, when I thought that the most was when I thought she was gonna masturbate, because I didn't know at that point if like it would bite her finger like at random or anything that went in there. It hadn't yet been revealed that it doesn't do it if it's consensual in Air Bunnies. Yeah, I think not necessarily the doctor, because I don't know, like that was just so horrifying I wasn't really thinking about it. But definitely when she was about to go in, I was like, don't do it.
I don't know. It's like the feeling of body horror that I normally associate with is like the context of like coming of age or coming to terms with some part of the body that I think makes it more of a generalized experience. Like in the film, I don't feel like she necessarily becomes more comfortable with her sexuality or with her vagina. She just realizes what she can use it for. However, I think in a lot of other films where they do use like body horror elements, by the end of the movie, the main character has come to terms and like is completely at peace with it and they've grown from it. But in this movie, it's just like trauma. Oh, she realizes this is a weapon.
I think, Louisa, you said that the comedy aspect of it was like strange and didn't fit. And at first I felt exactly the same. I was like, this doesn't work at all. But actually, once the man finds out that like his dick has been cut off, I was laughing. I was like full on laughing and not like, this is weird and I'm uncomfortable. It was like really funny. And I don't know if that was good. I don't know if it's sort of the power of laughter to like destabilize authority. I don't know if like that was what I was feeling necessarily, like laughing at him. It felt really satisfying. I was like, yeah, cut his dick off, but didn't then forgive like how poorly the film handled like everything else. It was an attempt. An attempt was made.
If it was going to be a comedy, then it would have to be like she's nuts. Like she's doing it unprovoked. She's just doing it because she has like, whatever, I'm going to do it. Doom. Like, you know? But it makes it like less comedic to me if she's like, you know, being attacked by every single friggin' guy in her life apart from her dad. Thank God. Like that's what kind of ruins it. I was like, I think it would work better as a comedy if there wasn't so much goddamn rape. It gets just gratuitous by the end of it.
Yeah.
I think why I'm not so mad at it is because I'm like, okay, when was it? 2007? I was like, oh, whatever. Like, shit was weird back then, and the films were weird. So I kind of just, like, accept it.
The fact that she's a virgin and this film is about castration anxiety and vagina dentata is quite interesting because, again, gonna bring it back to Freud. Apparently, in Taboo of Virginity, he explains that there are many cultures which aim to, like, I mean, lots of cultures have, you must have sex, you must keep yourself pure before marriage, but other cultures have, you need to have sex before marriage because otherwise your husband's going to be subjected to something weird because they're scared of the vagina and like what it could do, like the castration anxiety. So they would like have like weird defloration processes performed by someone else. And there's just like this fear that virginity heightens castration anxiety because the virgin might want to like take vengeance against someone who takes her virginity, or because it hurts the first time. I mean, it's not meant to, but or because it induces penis envy in them. So the fact that she's a virgin seems to be quite important in this as well, according to the psychological reading of it.
It's true! Jonathan got her! Jonathan got her!
Let's move on to a movie that is also centered around sexual activity and what happens afterwards. It Follows is the story of Jay, the girl next door, who after her first experience with new boyfriend Hugh, awakens tied to a chair with Hugh saying that he wants to make sure it worked. Jay is left confused until she starts to see something following her everywhere she goes in different body forms, doing anything to get to her.
Jay? You awake? You're not gonna believe me, and I need you to remember what I'm saying. This thing, it's gonna follow you. Somebody gave it to me, and I passed it to you. Wherever you are, it's somewhere walking straight for you. All you can do is pass it along to someone else.
It does follow. It's slow. It follows the succession of who you pass it to. You can't kill it, I'm assuming. And it can't kill anyone besides the person it's pursuing. And it always changes. It's a shapeshifter.
I thought this was like such a public way of showing like who you've slept with. Like, how embarrassing, you know?
There's also a lot of strategy with who you pass it to, because if you pass it to somebody who's gonna have trouble passing it, then it's just gonna come back to you that much quicker.
I died, like, the most disturbing thing about this film was trying to think, like, how I would get out of this situation, and I think my flatmate and I, like, came up with the idea that you would just have to be a sex worker. Like, you just have to be like, okay.
Yeah,
and just
have sex regularly.
Because that's the only, like, not just regularly, but have, like, professionally. Like, I would want multiple people on the books.
And it has to be with people who are going to, like, be far away from you afterwards.
Exactly.
And there would be no way for you to track if they passed it on. Like, you don't know how close it is to you at any given time. Like,
I would just
that's
kill myself.
Yeah, that's why I was like, there's no getting out of this, because, like, you could wait around and travel your whole life and fuck your whole life, but, like, you can't keep track of it in the way that you want to.
Obviously, because I always end up having one movie that I'm particularly fixated on every episode. This is the movie, this episode. I think part of the movie that makes it interesting is, like, there's little hints and stuff. Also, I really like, I did some of the horror fun facts. This is completely irrelevant from the theory. But the movie that she goes on her first date at with Hugh is actually the movie that had Evil Dead premiered at in 1981, which is really cool. I also like that they had the talk about Detroit and the 8 Mile and gentrification and the separation of the suburbs. I like that it was self-aware, but basically I thought it was interesting that, like, it appears at different ages, and then there's, like, that scene when they're at the movie and he was like, it must be nice to have your whole life ahead of you. And the poem that her teacher is reading out loud is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and in that poem it says, to lead you to the overwhelming question, oh, do not ask, what is it? And in the poem, it talks a lot about, like, time and life and everything. And then her friend has that quote at the end of the movie, like, that the scariest thing is that, like, it's inevitable and you can't get through things and your soul leaving your body is very scary. I feel like it is almost just because society places so much pressure on sex, people often feel like their life doesn't really begin until sex. And so it is kind of just like the march to death that happens once your life begins, and you no longer have the innocence of, like, what's ahead where you can daydream, because you already have experienced, I guess, what people brand as, like, the height of what's the best thing that is going to ever happen to you, because there's so much construct placed on virginity as it being, like, this special moment where you, like, become a adult or something. And so, like, when he's looking at the child and he's like, it must be nice to have your whole life ahead of you, it's almost just like it is the absence of innocence and the feeling of getting closer to death. I also thought it was interesting, like, the colors they use, because, like, on the first date, she's wearing a pink dress, and pink is, like, the mix between red and white, which is, like, innocence, and also, like, violence and passion. And then when she goes on the second date, when she loses her virginity, she's in a pure white dress. And then after she loses her virginity, she's in pink underwear. And also when he drugs her, you see, like, a flash of her red nails. And also the girl at the beginning of the movie who's dead is wearing a red high heel that's stuck straight up. So I thought it was an interesting use of color to talk about, like, innocence and virginity and violence and stuff.
That first shot of, like, the high heel on the body, I
Flamingo
loved
foot.
that. Like, I thought it was, yeah, the flamingo foot. I thought the gore and also the scary forms that it took when it, like, got really close. I thought that was for 2014, especially pretty fresh horror to me. Like, I thought it was, like, shocking. The jump scares weren't, like, too predictable. I mean, we talked about this a little bit with the final girl virginity trope about, like, the horror starts, like you were saying, when the sex starts, or that having sex in a horror movie means you're going to die, and, like, that being, like, everybody knows that that's, like, the rules of horror. I thought that this movie did a more complex version of that, like, body horror being close to sex, or, like, the proximity of, like, vulnerability and pain, or the proximity of, like, nudity and fear, of, like, you're being completely exposed, and, like, that being the scariest moment to, like, be caught in. I think that's why a lot of the times people die soon after a sex scene, or, like, during a sex scene in horror. Like, this movie did it a little differently because it has to come hours or days after, because it's, like, a slow moving beast, whereas, like, in a slasher movie, like, you might die while you're having sex, like, the consequences are immediate. But something about that, like, when you're especially if you're watching in a theater or watching a scary movie with somebody, when there's a gratuitous sex scene, it lulls you into this weird, like, it's, like, uncomfortable in a different way. And then all of a sudden, if there's, like, body horror that comes immediately after that, it's like, oh no, those people were just in their most vulnerable state, and so was I as the viewer. Like, I'm uncomfortable because sex is uncomfortable, and violence is uncomfortable, and bodies are uncomfortable. And imagine having pain close to sex, or having pain close to nudity, like, all those things that, like, the way that they mesh in my brain is just, like, it's I think that to me is, like, the peak of body horror, is there is some element of sex to it, because they're so intertwined in my brain.
I think it's interesting, like, the nudity aspect. I kind of thought, like, it is, like, such an abject figure. It's, like, literalizing what abjection would look like. And when it appears, like, I thought one scene that was really interesting was, like, the random corpse in the hallway that's, like, urinating and also kind of half naked. And when we first see it as well, it appears, well, not first see it, but when she's tied up in the chair when she's naked, and it appears as, like, a naked woman walking towards them. I was like, it's always, like, I don't know, like, nudity is kind of abject, like, because it's bringing attention to, like, body. Urinating, as we know, waste is, like, an abject, body waste is, like, an abject thing. Yeah, and, like, corpse as well, like, because it kind of looked like a zombie, the one in the hallway. So, yeah, that's also an abject thing.
The first time I saw nudity and horror together was a scene in The Shining in the bathtub with the naked woman. She got, like, the saggy boobs and she's rotting.
Terrible.
That I think that's the first time I've seen it, and it, like, this movie hit me in the same way in, like, all those weird places, because I watched that as a kid. I'm like, ew, but she's naked. Like, it wasn't even like that she was rotting flesh. I was like, she need to put some clothes on.
The first one that she saw was Hugh's mom, which I thought was interesting because, I don't know, like, Hugh's mom doesn't necessarily have a connection to her. But also it felt like maybe all of the characters that it followed had some sort of trauma. Like, she had a single parent, and we actually never fully see her mom's face the entire movie. Like, her mom's face is, when they show the family picture, is out of focus, and her dad died, and she sees the dad, and she doesn't even want to tell them, which she saw at the pool scene. And then we have the guy's mom who, like, busts in his room and sex him to death. It seems like all of them have some sort of parental connection or trauma as well, which is a dynamic that I think is interesting.
I thought it was interesting when it comes to, like, different genders, because basically it comes as, like, the mother for, like, the male victims, But then for Jay, it appeared at the... I mean, obviously it shapeshifts to different genders in general, but like I feel like when it delivers the final blow, it's as like the parent that's a different gender to yourself. So for the boys, it was their mother, and for Jay, it was her dead father.
I thought what was also interesting about this movie is how we talked about like how the nudity is used as part of the abject, but in the sex scenes there is no nudity, like in the actual sex scenes. Like when she's in the hospital and Greg is like, yeah, I will have sex with you to get rid of this creature. Also, to be honest, I had mixed feelings about the male characters in this movie. The treatment of her by Hugh, we know he obviously used a fake name. I think his real name was like Fred, and he had like that little house or whatever he was living in with all his alarm bells. And then we have her sister's friend who works at the ice cream parlor, who's basically the embodiment of the nice guy. And then we have the guy next door who's kind of like the bad boy, but also has a soft side. And I mean, he basically just wasn't cautious enough. He knew it was coming for him, but he just literally didn't care or like try to avoid anything. And then the guy who's the embodiment of a nice guy, like as soon as he was like, oh, she could sleep with someone else and transfer it. You're a girl, it should be easy. He was like, yes, this is my moment. I can't wait to sacrifice myself. And I was like, this dude is creepy. I am sorry.
That was so wild. I was like, he's really about to risk it all for that particular biscuit. That scene got me because that little boy, I'm like, who you gonna pass it to in time?
To top it off, he like goes and looks at sex workers and is like, I'm just gonna give it to a prostitute. And I was like, this man is shitty. Like, I'm not a fan.
Yeah, that's fucked up. That was fucked up. It also was interesting to talk, like, thought process of like who is considered disposable. Like, who would you like not feel fucked up passing it to? And I feel like a lot of people would pass it to a sex worker, or like you were saying, like you would have to be a sex worker yourself to like survive it.
But I'm like, honestly, I guess like as a girl it would be easier just because guys don't really have the most critical thought process in terms of like, I'm not gonna sleep with you. Usually, like, I mean, honestly, if you walked up to a dude on the street and was like, would you like to go have sex? They might say yeah. So like it would be a lot easier. I guess you would just have to use it like that Girl Walks Home Alone at Night movie where she used it as like a weapon. And just be like, I can pass this to them and just run through a bunch of awful people and give it to them.
Can we talk about, when did this movie come out? 2014? The soundtrack was
I
so
hated
fun.
it.
I thought it was great.
I know, I liked it. I thought it was great. It was so 80s. It was so like classic 80s slasher, like whatever. When was this supposed to be set?
It like had no time. They deliberately like made things ambiguous.
That's good to know because I was mad confused about it. And I just said it in the 80s because the music was so rooted in like 80s horror, specifically that like synth and the doo doo doo. I'll put a sound clip, people, so I don't have to do it. But
I used to daydream about being old enough to go on dates. I had this image of myself holding hands with.
yeah, a lot of synth, a lot of like, I thought the parts that were just like scary sounds, like the score, I thought was spooky scary. It got under my skin. It made me upset. I thought it did what it was supposed to do.
I like that you brought up time because I think one of the things that makes it follow so creepy is like the fact that time feels like it's a loop because we don't really understand what time they're meant to be in, and like no one seems to be truly happy in this time loop. It seems like they're all just passing the time, and then once it starts following you, your life is basically revolving around how much time you have to outrun this thing that's approaching you, which honestly, thinking about is like a depressing metaphor for life in general. Is like,
I mean, I thought it was definitely like an STI metaphor, or like a, some, that type of thing. It didn't line up in a way that made sense, because it's like, okay, say you have like an STI that's like you can live with it, and you just get treatment, like herpes, like you have flare-ups, but it's like generally like manageable, and you can have sex with herpes, and like people don't get it. I think it's fucked up if it was an STI metaphor, because most STIs you can live with and have sex and like have partners and do whatever if you're like safe and cautious and communicate and do all of that. the fact that there's rules to this and that you have to tell the people the rules then solidified the metaphor for me, because I was like, okay, why don't you just have sex with somebody and then like what obligation have you to tell them that then they have this thing? But you have to tell them, because if they don't have the survival instinct to pass it or not die, then it'll just come after you like in a second. I'm like, okay, so I'm like, how do they know the rules? Who decided? Why has everyone been telling everyone this whole time? But it makes sense because like you're protecting yourself by telling somebody that they've got the thing. And then I was like, oh, okay, so it's a disease. So it's like, I'm telling you that I passed a disease to you. It's like the same. And it's to protect yourself and to protect others.
In the interview, the director, David Robert Mitchell, said that the basic ideal of being followed by something that looked like different people that was very slow always came from a reoccurring nightmare that he had when he was a kid. And then later, as an adult, he added like the sexual aspect of passing on a terrible thing that follows you. And so he said it like combined his childhood with his adulthood fear. And that was like when he was asked if it was a sexually transmitted disease metaphor. I think it works as that, but I don't know if it's like the intended metaphor that he went for. And just because I'm like, unless it was like HIV, you don't really die from it. And even HIV is quite treatable nowadays.
I saw a lot of articles saying the HIV thing. I didn't really look at like what the director's motivation was, but I was like, oh, if it was like a queer metaphor, then why does the parent who appears have to be a different gender to the victim? Like, why did the guys have to have the killing blow delivered by their mother, of it in the form of its mother, and why does Jay have it delivered in the form of her father? Because if you're already crossing one taboo, you might as well cross the taboo of homosexuality. You know what I mean? I was like, why couldn't it have appeared as her mother? Is it just because it was more shocking, I guess, to have the dad?
Yeah, it also seemed to be explicitly about like penetrative sex. And I wonder if that's part of the law.
Now that you mention that, this movie is actually quite heteronormative because there is no implication that you can pass it through queer sex.
Yeah, the whole time I was like, pass it to your sister's friends. They're there. No one's offering.
I think maybe we are meant to interpret her friend Yara as definitely not being into guys. The one who's always reading the quotes from the clam. Also, the clam just felt like a symbol for almost vagina dentata, just because like a clam snaps. Mm. And so her carrying it felt like she was not going to be an option of anyone who wanted to get this disease.
I did think when I was watching it with my flatmate, I was like, this is a you problem then. I was like, sidestepped, haha.
Can I talk about the Detroit piece, like, real quick? So I didn't know it was set in Detroit. Like, for most of the movie, until they had that explicit speech about, like, the gentrification and all of that. But I was looking at it, I was like, this is Detroit. Like, I knew from looking at it because I grew up there, like, as a kid. And I was like, this is very obviously Detroit, especially the scenes where they're, like, showing the abandoned houses. And I was watching with somebody who's never been there, and they're like, oh, I thought this was a suburb. They're like, yeah, they are from the suburbs, but, like, that's what Detroit looks like. It's houses. It's not apartment buildings. It's not a big city in the way that other cities. It's, like, a lot of abandoned houses. And something really, really bothered me about using Detroit as a site of horror, because it's not an abandoned city, right? Like, people live there. It's not full of spooky haunted houses and, like, whisperings in the night. There's, like, it's also because they're coming from the suburbs, and even though they have the conversation, it's like there's this, like, implied sense of danger when they, like, even the lighting is different, and they have all these just pan shots of, like, you know, when you're in a car, what is that called, when you're in a car and the shot is, like, the windows passing, or just, like, the scenery going by. The fact that it was so identifiable to me as Detroit, and that it was, like, the implied danger behind everything, really rubbed me the wrong way, because you never see any people walking down the street. It's like it's a literal ghost town, and it was really upsetting to me. And I felt like they had that speech specifically to, like, address the fact that you've made an actual city that looks like that the site of your horror movie, is like, and did nothing to make it look any scarier besides change the lighting, was, like, really fucked up to me. Or that, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not, and a lot of the time people use it as this grand metaphor. It's like, oh, the nature has there's a lot of buildings where, like, nature has taken it back, and, like, they've fallen apart, and it's really, there's a lot of green spaces, and it, like, looks cool. Anthony Bourdain also did an episode on Detroit with no fucking people in it. But like, I don't know. It's a little fucked up. And it's like they either could have been from the city. Like, why'd they come from the suburbs? Why? It had nothing to do with the plot besides that, like, oh, I'm gonna drive super far to get away from it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And there was only the like 3 lines of dialogue addressing it. And I don't think it added anything new. Also, if you have no idea about Detroit,
I don't think anybody who hasn't been there would have clocked it as Detroit. I only said it offhandedly. I was like, that looks a little bit like Detroit. And then when they had that line, I was like, fuck me. Like, not this again, please. It's an actual city. It's not a haunted house.
I feel like I was a little bit disappointed with this movie. It was my first time watching it, and I accept like part of the blame for that, because I think my expectation for it was that the idea of it being sexually transmitted was going to be core to the story, or at least like the lore or the horror. And like you guys have said, sex obviously is a significant part because of the way it's like intertwined with death and the uncanny and the abject, and that's all great. But I think I set myself up for like a little bit of disappointment in the end, when actually the whole idea of like the entity, and the sort of dread of an impending doom of like slowly trudging towards death. Anytime a film is centered around that, I'm kind of like snore, because maybe I'm like, oh, that sounds fine. I think I just it felt like it was anticlimactic for me. I really liked how it like subverted that trope of like, you've sex, you're gonna die, but it's because you're like, you know, impure, and it's normally, you know, female characters that suffer that kind of sentence. But I think I was expecting, I maybe like gave it too high of an expectation, and I was waiting for like the ball to drop, and it didn't, and sometimes I was bored. But yeah, I think I really, really wish I'd watched it in 2014 in the cinema. It was like such a it film at that time, but also it would have maybe helped with me enjoying it. I don't know.
I saw this movie for the first time in 2014, and I saw it like at a cinema with my mom and my sister. And the first time I saw it, I actually really did like it. And this time that I saw it, I actually got a different message. I remember when I watched it when I was 18, that's how old I was in 2014. I kind of thought of it as like a weird metaphor for body count, and how it kind of haunts you in the way that people either hold it over you in like a negative aspect, or a way that sometimes people hold it against themselves and think that they can't get to a certain number, or they're worthless, or something like that. But then when I watched it this time, I kind of thought of it as like the perfect horror film for someone in their 20s, just because like you are inevitably like shedding through partners, and in a way you still carry those people with you. And in the end, when we see her and Nice Guy holding hands, they just visibly look so unhappy. And I thought, this movie is kind of like this temporal paranoia nightmare of like, you are afraid, and at the same time you're being with people that in a way follow you in like this negative way that is a sort of trauma. But her experience with Hugh at the beginning of the movie, like, he's definitely in a way sort of pressuring her into sex, and then afterwards he literally chloroforms her and ties her to a chair, and then he very publicly throws her outside of her house in her underwear, where she has to go to the hospital. And that is a question if it was assault as well, because obviously she didn't know she was taking on it like the people later in the film. And when she has the other experiences, it's literally just to get rid of it. Like, it's not because she is attracted to Nice Guy or Greg. It's just because she's trying to buy herself time. And then eventually she just settles with Greg, and they just accept that they'll have to eventually, I guess, step out, so they spread it to someone else. But eventually, like, this death
Not
is...
Greg, the other
yeah,
one.
whatever his name is. Nice Guy. He doesn't get a name in this. Nice Ice Cream Boy, who's literally the epitome of nice guy. she definitely is settling with him at the end of the movie, because like this is someone who she can comfortably be with and she doesn't have to explain it to again. In a way, it feels like sometimes people settle with people so that they don't have to continuously explain themselves and explain the trauma that they carry with them. And so sometimes we settle very early in our lives and we are marching towards death with this person who we actually fucking hate or don't like that much. They don't make us happy.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm horrified or a little bit comforted, because I saw a lot of engagement announcements this past weekend, and I was for a moment upset that no one was engaged to I. But then now I'm like, but I'm not marching towards death yet. Like, there's still time.
It's that visual at the end of like you see it following them, and they just have these blank faces as they blankly hold hands. And I'm like, she's literally with this man because she doesn't want to have to explain it to anyone else. So this man who's been pining for her forever and is like, I will die for the puss, is like who she literally settles with. And she's not happy. He really happy because he knows that she doesn't like him, but they're both just like, we'll do this until we die.
You had a whole experience with this film. I feel like I didn't read that far into it. I was like, what would I do?
You're like, how do we survive?
Yeah, I was like, what do we do? Okay, I don't know if it happens to queer women, so maybe I'm okay, but if not, I'll just become a sex worker and that's how I'll get out of it. But you're like, we're slowly marching towards death and we're all settling for mediocrity and just aging every day towards an inevitable abyss. And I'm like, fuck.
In the 2016 French film Raw, a young vegetarian veterinary school student begins her first year. In a hazing ritual, Justine is forced to eat a raw rabbit kidney. After tasting meat for the first time, Justine begins to have strange cravings and dark revelations about herself and her family, while also discovering herself and her sexuality. So guys, have you eaten anything strange or within our own culture strange?
I've eaten some questionable milk.
I don't know what it's called, but in Korea they have like this dish where it's like raw meat and then a egg that's cracked on top of it. That's raw. And then raw octopus tentacles. And I've eaten that.
No, that sounds good. I want that. I'm a huge carnivore. I feel like I'm big about using every part of the animal, so I've eaten a lot of weird parts of the animal, like, you know, the chicken feet and the pig's ears and the lamb brains. Like, I don't know. I just like feel like if you're going to, especially if you're going to buy a big piece of meat or a whole animal for an occasion, like use the bones for broth, like really utilize every piece of it. But I feel like it is culturally specific, because I've never been in a context where like eating the part was weird. Oh, but I love a good beef tongue. I think of the weird foods that I like go out of my way to get, like a beef tongue taco, and when I was in New York was really it. It's if it's prepared right, if they scrape off the taste buds properly, because you can tell if there's taste buds on it still, and like those are the places that kind of like rush the preparation of it. But like if it looks indistinguishable from like steak, essentially, it's so tender and juicy and delicious.
I haven't really had that much weird meat. Like, have
you had a hot dog? You had weird meat.
Yeah, everyone's had a fucking hot dog. Everyone, okay, yeah, but like in terms of I have seen like I've never like voluntarily gone and had beef tongue or anything. I've also only seen it on the menu and thought, oh, that's weird. I think like the only thing I've had is like trying to be French. I mean, I am a quarter French, but like having escargot, and I had frog's leg.
Okay, Beyonce.
Yeah, no, yeah. Frogs' legs and snails was what I had. But that's like, that's not even weird because all of France
snails
do
are
it.
good.
It was really good. They were really garlicky, and frogs' legs just taste like chicken with the consistency of fish.
I'm fairly sure that I've had gator before when I was in like kindergarten and we went on a field trip to a gator farm.
Yes, I had gator mac and cheese. That was good.
Whoa.
Sounds so weird, like the combination.
It doesn't taste bad.
It's kind of like lobster mac and cheese in like concept, but not in texture.
I love some lobster mac and cheese.
Oh, babe.
Sorry.
Should we leave you alone?
I am so hungry. I don't know why.
I don't think I'd ever eat raw meat. I don't really like raw egg.
Sushi?
Yeah, I'm afraid about getting ill. Like, that's just like the hypochondriac side. But also as a vegetarian. But I really am pro eating animals. I know that sounds strange. Yeah, I'll leave it to that. That's my statement.
I'm imagining holding a pro eat animal sign. Eat them animals.
Would you guys eat somebody, if like a human, if you had to?
No.
I think that's a cop-out, not in a survival context. I think if you went to a country and they were like, here you go, this is what we do. Would you like this human hot pot?
That's going to be a hell no for me.
No.
I think I would try it. I would try it and be disgusted with myself, but I would try it. In a survival situation, it depends if I know the person and if they've given me permission. Best case scenario, it's a stranger who gave me permission, because then I have no emotional ties to the body and also no guilt.
Yeah, but
that
why
they
are you
didn't
in
wanna
that
be eaten.
survival situation with a stranger?
Like a plane crash?
Imagine being in a plane crash and someone being like, just so you know, guys, if anything happens, you can eat me. Like, who would say that? No one would volunteer.
Zeba literally said that 2 days ago. So
you guys,
Zeba
your
would say
family
it.
would have like no body. They would send back and be like, oh my God, why are there bite marks?
That's okay. No, the body and the mind are separate. What happens to my body after I've pieced out of it is truly none of my business. I don't have a lot of meat to offer the other plane crash victims, and I feel bad about that.
To be fair, I think there's a lot of like hypocrisy in how the treatment of cannibalism, and maybe this is basic and everybody already knows it, but I was looking up the etymology of the word, and let me just get it up. This is from etymologyonline.com thing. And it's human that eats human flesh, but it comes from the 1550s, and it's from the Spanish kind of word cannibal or caribal. That's probably a terrible accent, sorry. Meaning savage, cannibal, from canniba. And this is basically comes from Christopher Columbus. And it was how he, like, it got lost in translation, but there was another sort of, like, people, I think it was the Arawak people who were on in the Caribbean, the West Indies, and they called another group of people who were actually called Kalino or Korea, Carib, and like overseas it got translated to cannib, which then became cannibal. So essentially, and this was based on like rumors, so it wasn't exactly I don't know if there's any like actual hard evidence, or maybe it's something that gets debated whether this group were actually cannibals or if this was just something that the other group had said about them, because apparently that group ate the other group's prisoners that they caught. So like obviously they would want to be like, oh, they eat them, they're bad. You know, there was some motivation there. But yeah, so it has definitely like racist colonialist roots as well, because Christopher Columbus like wrote back to the Queen, and the Queen was like, oh, you can imprison, enslave, kill people who are cannibals because they'll never be converted to Christianity. They're very unchristian. So then when it became a political thing, and then almost like suddenly loads of them were cannibals, even though it was always just a rumor apparently to begin with. So it became like an excuse to kill like indigenous populations.
I understand like the religious hesitation not to be opposed to cannibalism, because the body is sacred and you want it, like, for Christianity, you have to be buried. But if outside of religion, or even outside of, like, any sort of sense of spirituality tied to the body, like, what is the repulsion towards cannibalism?
Yeah, I'm not pro cannibalism by a mile, but also I think the religious context is a bit foggy, because for communion we literally eat crackers and drink sparkling grape juice and say it's the body and the blood of Christ. So I think that is a bit murky in religious terms, especially like when you think of like the movie Mother, and they literally eat her baby, and it's like, but we ate Jesus, so he lives on forever through us. And it's like, I remember when I saw that in the movie, I was like, oh no, that just effed this up for me. I literally can never have communion wine and crackers again without being like, yikes.
from a like anthropological perspective, I feel like I just don't understand why, you know? So I'm just going to leave that be. I'm going to let all people who have cannibalized with consent give the free pass from an anthropological cultural perspective. Now from a kink perspective.
Oh God.
No.
I'm not naming any names. I feel like
A recent
if it's
revelation.
of recent revelation, I would say that there are some people, I would say even talking about cannibalism without consent in a sexual context, I would say is a violation. Even if you don't take a bite, even bringing it up without a clear okay.
A little nibble.
That ain't it. That ain't it. Blood kinks, I just like, be safe, everyone. Be safe. I don't know what corners of the internet everybody's like hanging out in, but I guess as long as it's safe and consensual, I'm okay.
I don't know if I believe that anymore.
There was a TikTok I saw like a few days ago that was talking about how like porn culture has infiltrated young people so much in our generation, and especially the people in the generation below us in Gen Z. And a lot of people like way uncomfortably glorify pain and sex and mean like, oh, let's not have people thinking their partner should beat them down and treat them like shit without their consent. Like, be safe, everyone. Don't let people treat you horribly and mud stomp you if that is not what you wish.
There was this like BDSM quiz going around a few years ago that was like you just go through a giant list of kinks and like put yourself on like a scale, and then they rank what your kinks are like in an order. And because the extremes were so extreme, like the extremes were like level extremes, that anybody who was like, I don't consent to being barbecued and spit roasted got vanilla. And I was like, there's no way that like there's something off about this.
I agree. We should probably, like, I understand kinks are normal. Exploring your like sexual fantasies is normal, but not all things that turn you on come from a healthy place. Which is fine. We can't avoid this. But just go to therapy. Just fucking go to therapy, please. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of it.
Especially if you're a rich actor who can afford it.
One thing about his situation that I thought was interesting was, I think I saw something on Twitter where in like an old interview he was saying like he had kinks, but he often didn't like express them with his wife in sex because he respected her too much. And I think if it's rooting from you not respecting people or people not respecting you, you need to evaluate the level of healthy that is, because people should not be viewing you as subhuman in sexual activity unless obviously that's what you're asking them to do. But no.
This is the similar thing I have about like race play and slave play. I'm just a bit like, I want to let people do whatever they want. I want to let people do what they want, but I really just cannot vibe like with it. I just cannot.
I like that this episode has so much to do with like femininity. To be quite honest, I feel like this is the episode that we have had that has like the most to do with like maternal links to monstrosity. When the dad shows her his chest or whatever, I did have the question of how was she like taking a chunk out of people, but like when her dad had bite marks all over his chest, like they were just bite marks, and some of them were really recent. I was like, has the mom like learned how to control herself? I don't know.
I think it's like if you eat the meat, then it enacts like a frenzy.
But the parents did it because she had the pictures of the parents like drinking blood and bathing in blood and eating the rabbit kidneys. So they had did the same thing. But I think like the dad in this movie is like the example of the castrated male, because he's literally just like, yes, you can emasculate me.
But the mother point, yeah. I mean, we talked about this in episode 2 with the archaic mother, and I thought the like little twist at the end that it was the mom's condition overall was very much like you said, he is the castrated father because she is the sort of origin castrating mother. And in that sort of lore, we'll just do a quick little recap. The archaic mother is really terrifying because she threatens to sort of reincorporate you, so you might get like a vagina dentata, a sort of monstrous womb, either way, or like even cannibalism in this instance if we're looking at like the mouth is also kind of vagina dentata, but it's, yeah, transferred. It's kind of like she's reincorporating them back into her body, and nothing exists apart from the mother. Like, if the original origin story, she's the object, not the subject, because everything is defined by the father and his penis. In this origin story, the mother she kind of reclaims her subjectivity and becomes the very center of the story, and everything becomes one because she collapses and there's no difference. It's like a psychic kind of death, according to Creed. So I thought that was really interesting that the cannibalism comes from the maternal line, because it's kind of very much that monstrous femme trope. And I also thought it was very interesting that Adrian was queer, because I was like, it was also like, he seemed like maybe actually bisexual, and it seemed like perhaps biphobic, because I kind of gathered, like, why would they call him gay? And then they have the sex scene with them together, and at first I was just like, oh, you know, stuff happens, like, stuff gets mixed up, labels don't always fit, sexuality's fluid, like, whatever. But then I was like, well, maybe he was bi and had a thing with the sister, because they implied that they had some sort of pre-existing relationship. She was like, why do you have my sister's number? And then he got put off because he kind of knew maybe roughly about the sister or something. It would explain why he's so understanding with the younger sister. And I also kind of thought maybe it's like some sort of sexual rivalry between the two sisters for that guy, because why would she choose him as the victim? Like, the older sister at the end, she consumes Adrian, so it's like, I don't know, I thought maybe he was bisexual and just saying gay because he just really, almost like another castration anxiety thing, like, oh, I don't want to be consumed, so I'm gonna just be with men. It was like the kind of exact opposite, similar to the brother in Teeth, who decides to just do anal after that. But in this case, he's just put off women entirely. I mean, I don't know if that's me. I'm not trying to make some weird, like, sexuality narrative, but I thought maybe that was kind of how I read it.
With Adrian, I felt like he almost felt like he was taking on, like, a parental figure role for her, because he was so, like, nurturing and making sure she was okay and checking in on her. And I got the idea that when he did have sex with her, it was just because he felt scared for what she was going to do to someone else. So it felt like he was giving her a safe place to, like, lose her virginity. And I feel like the sister was almost jealous of that parental, like, guardian bond that she didn't necessarily have the same experience with. Also, I would argue that her sister was sexually harassing the fuck out of Adrian. It was very uncomfortable. He didn't seem as though he
Which
liked
sister? Sorry.
her older sister. And her, in a way, because there was no indication that he was romantically interested in either of them. It just seemed like they were throwing themselves upon him. And maybe because, like, his, like, understanding nature did mimic that of their parents. And their parents were the only other people that were linked to, like, their disease of eating flesh. So they felt competition for it, like siblings feel competition for parental love. In the same sense of, like, the sibling rivalry and, like, uncanny things in this film, like, there is, like, the abject of throwing up hair and the constant covering of blood and stuff. The hair almost took me out. Like,
I have, like, a throwing up phobia. I have thrown up maybe once in the last 10 years. I just refuse.
High five.
I just refuse to throw up. Like, I get the urge and I'm just like, I simply
By
won't.
will alone.
My friend also has that fear. I thought it was so weird, but it's actually quite common. Like, loads of people have a fear of sick, and they won't do it. Like, I don't love sick, but I'm not afraid of it.
I literally can't control it. Like, every time when I get my period, at least one day, I'm so sick that all I can do is throw up.
What?
That's so bad.
That's bad.
Yeah, it sucks.
Can we go all the way back to, like, okay, I'm going way, way back to the beginning for just some basic concepts. Is she vegetarian because they knew that if she ate meat, this, like, this hereditary instinct would come out? Okay, that helps things. I also don't understand why this group of veterinarians is hazing people. And, like, ain't y'all love animals? You just let the girl be vegan. I did not understand, like, why they were so vicious about it.
I literally wrote in my notes, I would not let any of these vets operate on my dog. Like, they are all hinged. Like, this hazing was so intense. In a week straight, I was like, no, I would drop out. I would report them for throwing my bed out the window. I would report them for making me try to have sex with someone until paint comes off. Like, all of it was so fucking toxic. I was just like, this is fucked up. Like, part of the horror was not even the cannibalism. It was just the fucking uni.
I have a note that was like, the French need to be stopped, but also vegans, because like, okay, I thought their attitude towards things was perhaps an overreaction, misguided, if you will. But when I was like, yo, don't you understand that she's a vegetarian? And then, because she's a vet, she loves animals, why would she eat meat? Like, that made sense to me. I used to know, like, a lot of, like, militaristic vegans who, like, firmly believed that, like, animal lives and human lives were, like,
Are you going to
equal.
connect this with the rape comment they made?
Yeah, I knew you were going to do that.
See what we're not gonna do is like compare the like eating of animals to the eating of people, because there's a reason this movie starts with a rabbit liver and ends with people. It's because there's a scale of severity. It's because eating one is not like eating the other, and we understand that by the end, because the stakes of eating people are just higher. They simply are. I cannot be convinced that the comparison can be made between the two.
I thought the rabbit liver was really, not liver, the kidney was really symbolic, because like the rabbit is the prey and she's starting there in order to become the predator, and also like the kidney has the function of like cleansing the body. So I felt like it was like an animal rebirth moment of like reprogramming her from being like this very meek girl to the predator. Along with many of the abject things, I thought because Justine like always is biting people while she has sex, and we know that's why her daddy got bite marks all over his chest and his back, I thought it was strange that her sister and her were biting each other in the faces when they got in a fight. I was like, this feels very much like we're supposed to interpret this as incestuous abject.
I kind of thought, yeah, because they do make this connection between sex and cannibalism very direct. So I did think it was sort of weirdly, whatever. Also, the sister seemed massively just queer to me, the queer vibes.
The eating scenes in this, like the regular food eating on top of the cannibalism eating, reminded me so much of Blue is the Warmest Color. And I'm like, what is it with the French and these cinematic eating, like close-ups on the mouth? Like, I get that it's sexual, I understand that, but they really hammer it home. Like, some of them
hammer it home, do
long.
they?
Please, do we have to do this?
I think at this moment we should insert Louisa fangirling over lobster mac and cheese.
But not in texture.
I love some lobster mac and cheese.
Oh, babe.
Sorry.
On IMDb, in their trivia section, the director actually said that the actress wanted to work on her body and posture, because throughout the movie you can see the drastic change in the beginning and the end of the movie, and how her character's posture changes as she transforms. And also it kind of like mimics that of an animal like movement by the end. And I also would say that the veterinary school also feels like they have like an animal like hedonism, in which they just kind of party a lot, despite the fact that you would be very busy in this setting. They seem to have ample free time to go to the club and cover people in paint and tell them they need to have sex until it comes off.
What did you guys think of that scene where, like, during a party, someone who was not a cannibal was just licking someone else's eyeball, and then
Ew,
it just
yeah.
pans to her, like, just dirtily sitting in the corner making some gross perv face. And I was just like, this is the worst thing ever. I hate eyeballs.
One thing that I think makes this movie so creepy is that I think the cannibalism is almost not really implied in the same way that we are meant to just see them as carnivores, because the people in this movie come across so animal-like. Like the way that she's sitting in the corner, the licking of the eyes, like the overly closeness and touchy nature that feels almost like they're like chimpanzees grooming each other. I feel like the people in this movie almost come across as animals. Also the fact that they eat a rabbit's heart, and there still is like that separation of the animals in this movie that they eat. It's not like they were like, oh, go eat a dog leg. There's still very much a taboo of like pets. And so I feel like the people in this movie almost fit into the animal kingdom in a way that it makes it almost like less taboo within the concept of the film, because we're not meant to interpret them in the same way that we interpret like ourselves. They just feel like very animal-like.
Oh, I just remembered her eating her sister's finger. Oh, that was
I didn't really mind that.
The top 3 worst moments. I mean, to be fair, I covered my eyes for a lot of this, and I was like, I'm sure the whole neighborhood heard me. I was fucking screaming watching this movie. The parts that got me the worst was for sure the eyeball, for sure the first when she ate that finger, because they could have reattached it.
Yeah.
I was mostly mad about that situation. And then there's one shot where she's not eating meat yet, and her body's having an adverse reaction, and she's like itching.
Oh god, it was grotesque.
And it was the sound of the itching that like really got to me.
They really did a good job. Like, this is a true blue body horror because her body is horrific with that rash. She's eating gross body parts, and then she's just like kind of, you know, a monster. It was all very ugh. It was very disturbing. I thought it was a great film. Like, it was a very good horror. It was kind of like up there in the level of like scary that Midsummer is there. Like, it was just very deeply disturbing to me. It masters the abject for sure. I wonder if the directors are vegan or if they're vegetarian or if they're like carnivores. Like, what is the message?
I read an interview of her basically like saying a lot of what we spoke about earlier about cannibalism through like different perspectives across cultures. Like, it really is just dependent on your values. And I think she was very much like pro cannibal in that context, being like, you know, it is something that's so tied to like us, our body, our sense of self. She just kind of wanted to go down like a more, she was like, I was really inspired by like Cronenberg's, you know, body horror, and really going quite like old school with it. But like you said in the beginning, Tyia, like how it ties in femininity is just like chef's kiss. Love it.
I think in this movie, like, we kind of are interpreting them being like cannibalistic or carnivores in like more than just one sense because of the hazing ritual that is going on. And so it just feels like even the people that are older are perpetuating the system of like dog eat dog or only survival of the fittest, because if you can't hack it and eat this rabbit kidney, like, you shouldn't even be here. And so it is like this predatory culture of forcing people to do things in order to fit like the mold of what is the fittest of what should be in the school. And if they do differentiate from that, then there is punishment, there's social ostracization. And so in a way it's still like this system of checks and balances, I guess, or even like a animal kingdom ranking of who's at the top and who's at the bottom that they have to abide by.
I was floored that the teachers were just allowing them to do this. The professors were just allowing the hazing to take place. Like, you have this girl walking into class with a giant diaper, or like the freshers have to dress like really, really like promiscuous that week. And if you don't, you have to wear the diaper. I was like, if I walked in, if my uni had just walked into a lecture like dressed like that, and like all the first years walked in like, really super slutty, like the professor would be like,
anyway.
the amount of times I get called a slut on this podcast, it's really like adding up, guys. What the hell? The professors I know would have been like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what kind of haze? Like, why was there no checks and balances system happening?
But I think the professors had also been through the same system. That's why I was saying, like, it felt like everyone was a part of the system of like being like, you got to work your way here, you got to earn it, or else you're not meant to be here.
They don't get new recruits, new hires.
No,
hire outside.
No, it seemed very nepotism because their parents went through the exact same school, and I think even other people said like, oh, my parents went here as well. Like, it was very much like you had to know somebody to go there. And then the professors were like, we went through this, so you will too. So yeah, it just seemed like a whole isolated different part of humanity in which they also were doing weird stuff. Again, licking eyeballs and stuff. This is not normal
French
behavior.
People. You know when she's going to the nurse or the doctor about her rash, and the nurse / doctor goes on that sort of like tangent about the girl who like couldn't get treatment or couldn't get like blood taken because everyone was like calling her fat. And we also have that like sort of bulimia side comment when she's like just thrown up loads of hair And the girl's like, use 2 fingers, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, I mean, certainly, maybe the bulimia comment, like, might have just, like, fit in there more, it might have gone, like, unnoticed, just in, like, a university narrative. But then, like, the nurse/doctor's sort of weird story seemed like they were trying to add, like, another dimension of body horror.
Yeah. Eating
I don't
disorder.
know, like,
the sister does say, like, oh, careful, you're gonna get too skinny, because she refuses to eat. And then when she does, like, go on these, like, frenzies, it is kind of like she's binge eating. And then it is very much like bulimia. Maybe it's, like, kind of a metaphor for bulimia.
I want to see the scene in Twilight where, like, Bella gets a pregnancy craving and it, like, is at the fridge, like, gorging on, like, O negative or some shit. And
Yeah, she did drink blood, too. Obviously, the vampires.
There's a lot of movies where, like, eating raw meat is, like, the signifier of
Rosemary's Baby.
Changes to come. Yeah.
People with sisters so that's just you, Tyia, right?
Yeah, I have a sister.
Would you let your sister wax your vagina? Like, I was floored by that.
She only waxes my underarms, and then, like, I'll go wax my vagina.
I would if my sister knew how to do it. Anybody who knows how to wax a vagina should do it.
But your sister,
she's not a professional.
Like,
if my sister was good at it, then yeah.
I don't know.
But her sister in this
Was
film
not
was
good.
clearly not good at it.
That was like also, that's another thing, like the such like little moments in this film which also were just like horrific body moments that had nothing to do with traditional horror. That I was just like, oh my god, a bad wax.
I didn't even watch it. I knew it was happening and I was like, skip. Don't want to. I can't believe that's the bit I couldn't watch.
This reminds me of, like, when we watched Midsommar, you were like, I can't believe they hit him on the back of the head. That was the worst part of the movie.
No, that was a dramatic hit on the back of the head, to be fair.
Yeah, but I would so much rather that than, like,
jumping from a cliff.
Off a cliff.
I promise you, I wasn't comparing those 2 deaths at that time.
But as, like, I was saying, I was like, this is where, like, having a female horror director really, like, helps, because, like, those little moments that, like, as a woman you could relate to, like a bad wax, which, like, things that have nothing to do with the horror that you can just throw in to even emphasize the body horror.
This is another fun fact from the movie that came from IMDb. But in the scene where Justine dances in front of the mirror and she's listening to the, like, gothic rap music, the band is actually made up of 2 sisters who rap about men in, like, a derogatory way.
Yeah, I don't speak French, but I got that vibe.
So I think that's interesting because her and her sister are, like, literally eating men. So it kind of feels like the same, like, metaphor of, like, becoming the predator in a society that is normally predatory towards women.
That's interesting. It's not even just a derogatory rap. It was full on, like, murder fantasy. So I was like, what? I guess, like, carnal desires being mixed with cannibalism, like, quite literally, yeah. Like, it kind of linked, the opposite effect of that would be, like, linking vegetarianism with, like, virginity, because she was a virgin beforehand. And I thought that was really interesting, like, association to make, like, yeah, like, just seeing as people say carnal desires and stuff like that in a sexual context, when they're, especially with, like, Christianity.
Like, obviously, the whole, like, consumption part is sexual. But if you think about, like, what is that, like, triangle of needs that human beings have?
Oh, yeah. Hierarchy of needs.
I feel like food and sex.
Are those together for you, Mila?
That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that. I'm saying that in terms of, like, primal animalistic drives.
I think you crave them in the same way.
I'm saying, if you think of the most, like, primal animalistic urges, people always, you know, be like, you want to find food and you want to fuck.
What about water?
Water it comes under food.
No, it's not. People always say food and water.
You always end up saying the most, like, accidentally sexual things. You're like, I need 2 things, meat and pussy.
I need 1 thing, meat. I'm gonna make, wait, I have to make the meme. I'm so sorry. I have to make the new hierarchy of needs.
It's just a triangle with meat in it. Actually, I don't know what I was trying to say. I think what I'm trying to say is that I'm not sure the consumption in this film, I don't think it's purely sexual. I think part of it is just a sort of like, it's meant to just be instinctual within like,
Primal.
you need to eat.
Yeah.
I don't know, y'all. I feel like when I'm hungry, I can't interchangeably just go bang someone. Like, if I'm hungry, I want to eat food.
I think Raw is one of my faves that we've done actually now. I think it just, but there's not a lot to say. It was just good.
It was very straightforward in the way that, like, there wasn't, like, a lot of stuff to, like, dissect the meaning behind. It was like, you figured out, they gave you the answers to what you needed to know.
But I like that. Like, we don't need the other lamb scenario where, like, dig for the meaning. Where is the meaning? Where is the plot? Like, style over substance. It's like, we don't need to get too, like, fucking pretentious about it. Like, just, you can do a really great movie and be very, like, transparent about what you're doing.
Thank you for listening to The Monstrous Feminine. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, SoundCloud, and Spotify at The Monstrous Feminine Podcast, and on Twitter at The MonFemPod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts to be our next Witch of the Week. We also have a TikTok, and we hope you follow us there at The Monstrous Feminine for podcast clips and more fun. Brooms up, witches out.